Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Well, the good news is that Trump has skin in the game. And the good news is that the federal employees who've worked on a position of privilege are afraid that they're going to be losing that privilege that has kept them employed as the rest of the country goes unemployed. Now, over the weekend, of course, we had Trump settle the $25 million lawsuit regarding Trump University. We talked about this earlier today. I said, tells you everything you need to know about this, that the media completely ignored the much larger scandal of the Clintons with Laureate University. There were questions there about the efficacy of the degrees, but there were also issues of influence peddling, money laundering, the same sort of thing that you always see from the Clinton Foundation. But I think it's important to look at the fact that Donald Trump has paid $25 million to set this aside so that he can move on with the business of government. Now, it's not uncommon to see someone who is wealthy putting their own money in. And of course, $25 million is a lot of money, even to a billionaire like Donald Trump. It's not uncommon to see them do that in order to become president. But now that he's won the election, he has decided that he's going to put this in to help him to set up a governing coalition. I think that's a very positive sign. He pointed out the only bad thing about winning the presidency is I didn't have time to go through a long but winning trial on Trump University. Too bad. In other words, he believes that he could have won. And of course, he could have won. He could have negotiated down this settlement. Instead, he just said, here, take it all. I've got to get busy running the country. I think that's a very good sign of what's to come. But also, it's a very good sign that the federal bureaucracy is very worried about the fact that they're going to lose some of their privileges. This story from the Washington Post, the hand-wringing that we see from the federal bureaucracy saying that Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress is drawing up plans to take on the government bureaucracy that they've long railed against by eroding their special job protections, grinding down benefits that federal workers have received for a generation. Perhaps those benefits are out of line with the benefits that are received by the people who pay their salaries and the rest of the country. Things like they're looking at hiring freezes because they've been growing uncontrollably. And then to automatic raises that they also get, a green light to fire poor performers. Why would they be exempted from that? Why would they get automatic raises? Why would they not have performance reviews where they could not be fired? See, that's an outrage. That is something that should be addressed, and only an outsider like Trump do we have a possibility of that even happening. And again, as we pointed out earlier today, the number of government employees now surpasses manufacturing jobs by 10 million. I pointed this out last week on the nightly news. And the fact that the increase in the number of federal jobs was more than twice what the decrease in manufacturing jobs were. So isn't that amazing that we see that kind of growth? That cannot be sustained. That has to stop. And yet we see that the establishment is now beginning to push back. And we can see this no better than with Henry Kissinger. Let's take a look at what Henry Kissinger said as we had a President-elect Obama 8 years ago, and now that we have a President-elect Trump. Now remember, 8 years ago, as he had just won, back in January of 2009, we have a story here from Infowars.com. Kissinger was lauding the coming depression, saying it was a tool that could be used. He said it generates a unique opportunity to usher in a world financial order and to force sovereign nations to, quote, face the reality that its dilemmas can be mastered only by common action. How did we see this manifest? Well, we saw that in Europe in the last 8 years, precisely by the fact that they created an economic catastrophe. Then they said, it's going to take you surrendering your sovereignty to the European Union in order for us to make this work. That's what they tried to do here as well. He goes on to say it 8 years ago, this is Henry Kissinger, an international order will emerge if a system of compatible priorities comes into being. Okay. Then he says the extraordinary impact of the president-elect Obama on the imagination of humanity is an important element in shaping a new world order. He goes on to say the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common. Now, of course, Kissinger is on the board of all these globalist organizations, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, which was created by his successor who ran the Carter administration. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the one who created the Trilateral Commission. We can see that mirrored in the trade partnerships, the Trans-Pacific, the transatlantic partnerships with us in the center. That's a picture of the Trilateral Commission. And of course, the Bilderberg Group, the Davos Group, we see all these different groups that are meeting. One of the former members of the CFR, Rear Admiral Chester Ward at the time, said the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty of the national independence of the United States. And that's what we saw this last election on. One more quote from 8 years ago. And of course, this was also in January of 2009. He had a CNBC interview. This was reported by New American. They asked him, what do you think, Mr. Kissinger, is the most important thing for President-elect Barack Obama? And he said, the president-elect is coming into office at a moment when there are upheavals in many parts of the world simultaneously. They talked about what's going on in catastrophes in India and Pakistan, the jihadist movement, etc. But then listen to what he has to say. He says, but Obama can give new impetus to American foreign policy. I think his task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't such a crisis, because they always use crisis as an opportunity to further their agenda, the New World Order. What is he saying now that we have a President-elect Trump 8 years later? Well, he's talking about perhaps he has the opportunity to mold Trump. He doesn't control Trump yet, and we hope that doesn't happen. And of course, the way they exerted control under the Reagan administration was to put more than 300 CFR members in the State Department. So it's very important at this point in time that people like Senator Sessions, who know what the game is about, hold fast and have some say in this. And so we hope that that is the case. But of course, Kissinger points out when he's interviewed, he says Trump doesn't have any obligations to any group. He's not owned by anybody. He got into power, he says, with absolutely no baggage. He says the most unique situation for this president-elect that I have experienced in that respect. He says he has no obligations to any particular group because he has become president on the basis of his own strategy. In other words, he doesn't owe these guys anything, and he's not owned by them. But then he goes on with kind of a warning. He says, one should not insist on nailing him into positions that he hasn't taken in the campaign, of which he doesn't insist. He said that in reaction to the interviewer saying, yeah, but what about all these things where he's going to rearrange the globalist trade agreements and so forth? And he goes, well, I'm not going to insist him in this. Perhaps he will change. We always criticize people before they come in. But if he insists on coming into that, he says, if he insists on them, then of course, disagreements will become expressed. In other words, they'll take that, they're going to see if he's really going to do what he has to say. If he does, then they're going to be fighting him. See, he's not excited like he was 8 years ago about the potential of creating a new world order out of the crisis that they viewed as an opportunity. And at the same time, we see a war breaking out between neocons and libertarians. This is an article on Infowars.com today from Zero Hedge. Say a battle is brewing between GOP foreign policy establishment and outsiders over who will sit on President-elect Trump's national security team. And they point out that, of course, we had a very conventional and hawkish Hillary Clinton that the establishment was looking forward to. They thought she was going to win. Republicans and Democrats, who make up the foreign policy elite, are laying the groundwork for a more assertive American foreign policy via flurry reports. This was back when the Washington Post was so confident that Hillary Clinton was going to win. That's what they were writing. But now they point out that there's a fight emerging. As a matter of fact, we see some very positive signs on that side as well. A person who has pushed for Bolton, who I think would be a very, quite a disaster. We've talked about this a lot at Infowars. The guy who is a full-on neocon, we see Elliot Cohen, who is also a former Bush State Department senior advisor, said that, Bolton would be capable Secretary of State. He'd be experienced and tough. He said, however, he said, based on what I've seen, I think that this Trump transition team, we just need to stay away from them. And other reports that we have seen, he said, they came in and they said, we won, you lost. Now you're trying to insinuate your way into this administration. So there is an understanding within the Trump transition team of who these people are and the fact that they are pushing for war at a number of different levels. There are some good signs. We have seen General Flynn put in, who wants to see a détente between America and Russia. And we have retired Army Colonel Andrew Bosovich saying that there needs to be a rethinking of American foreign policy. He said the U.S. must consider whether Saudi Arabia and Pakistan qualify as U.S. allies. He said the establishment doesn't want to touch questions like these with a 10-foot pole. Absolutely true. Now, at the same time, we've got the usual suspects, people like Lindsey Graham, John McCain, who are vowing to fight Trump's efforts to improve Russian ties. Yeah, they won a war. and they're going to do everything they can to make that war happen. Trump has earned considerable scorn from NATO member nations for promising a normalization of U.S.-Russian relations. Now it looks as though there is a bipartisan collection of senators stepping forward, promising to rein in any efforts of Trump to improve Russian relations. And of course, on that would be Lindsey Graham, who's vowed to go after Russia over allegations they've been interfering with our election process. So there he is. And we also have John McCain saying that they attempted to undermine America's elections. That same red herring that was put out by the DNC is now being put forward by the warmongers, Lindsey Graham and John McCain. That's the only basis that they have for opposing them, saying that we have to understand that Russia is and always will be an adversary and not a partner. Now, we don't have to go to war. We even have the commander of NATO, the Navy commander, saying Russia is not our enemy. That's a good sign. Navy Commander Vice Admiral Clive Johnstone said at a NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and of course he is the commander, top commanding officer in NATO. He says NATO does not see Russia as its enemy, but is trying to understand Moscow's motives and protect its own interests at the same time. He said Russia can develop and deploy its fleet to any areas, but NATO does not intend to stop it. Russia is not our enemy. We have no desire to get involved in a new Cold War. Good. But then he goes on to say, however, the Vice Admiral went on to accuse Russia of escalating tensions instead of controlling the situation, even going so far as to say that Russia is apparently trying to create a new world order. No, that is not true. The new world order is coming from the people like Henry Kissinger. A good example of where we don't want to go, and it's very concerning to see Donald Trump even talking to some people like John Bolton. I don't know, again, if it is the old adage, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. I hope that he doesn't go anywhere close to this guy. Here's 3 reasons, according to Business Insider, that John Bolton is a dangerous pick for Secretary of State. Now, of course, Donald Trump has said, I'm the only one who knows what the finalists are. But number 1, Bolton refuses to learn anything from the interventionist mistakes. Okay, now he's calling for an Iran regime change. And as I point out in this article, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives, and we don't even have a stable Iraq. That was Donald Trump saying that. Now we've got John Bolton, author of these types of policies, coming in and saying just last year he thinks that toppling Saddam Hussein was the right choice. He didn't learn anything from it. Number 2, John Bolton's approach is always war first, not America first. The type of thing that we saw during the debates when only Rand Paul and Donald Trump would say, I don't think we need to push for a no-fly zone in Syria, because pushing for that would be pushing for war. And the third thing, Bolton blames every problem on restraint. As I point out, to hear Bolton tell it, every foreign policy problem can be solved by hasty, expensive, reckless action. Throw enough money, weapons, and American lives at it, and you can fix anything, he believes. Thus, we see Bolton recommending U.S. military intervention everywhere and anywhere, bizarrely suggesting that the intervention wrought turmoil in Libya, Yemen, Iraq, and beyond are somehow the result of inaction. And of course, we've been telling you for the last several years that what is going on in Syria was fomented and created by the United States government using ISIS as a surrogate, just as they did in Libya, creating chaos there with their regime change. We pointed out that the narratives that the sarin gas was shot by the Syrian government against people, that was false. Eventually, U.S. intelligence admitted that as well. Honest people there joined with people at the UN, people with Russia and with Syria, saying, no, that wasn't from them. That was from a different source. So we've seen them pushing, even with false flag events, to try to get this war going. But, of course, people like John Bolton thinks that it was just inaction that caused this. And they go on to say, one thing is clear. Cozying up to Bolton and his ilk is a dangerous step away from Trump's better impulses and towards repetition of the very mistakes of the last 15 years that Trump's supporters trust him to repudiate. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about the surveillance state and how it's still going strong. But I think it's important to look at the tactics of the left, how they've pushed back. Remember when Jeff Sessions was announced, we've seen this massive push again, calling him a racist, just like we see them calling Steve Bannon a racist. It's not working because it's not true. And of course, as we see Ana Navarra call him out on CNN for being a racist, she says, there were these things that came up. They were allegations, actually, 20, 30 years ago that kept him from getting a judge appointment, they said at the time. Of course, those were never vetted. We don't know if they were true. But she says there's no statute of limitations on racism, except, of course, if you're talking about somebody like Senator Robert Byrd, who was somebody who created chapters of the Ku Klux Klan, who was an exalted Cyclops, who was heavily involved in that. And the Democrats had absolutely no problem forgiving him for his real racism when they come out with something that, even if it were true, if it is true, these allegations that have not been proven against Jeff Sessions, even if they were true, they are far more minor than what the genuine Ku Klux Klan guy Robert Byrd did. But the real issue that we're going to talk about when we come back, and it is something that is a concern with Jeff Sessions, it is something that is a concern with Donald Trump, and that is the surveillance state. Certainly, it's not going to be any worse than it would have been with Hillary Clinton. But will we be able to convince people like Senator Sessions that liberty is more important than security, that the Constitution and the rule of law is more important than security? We shall see, and we'll look at the questions about that when we return. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
But there was an article last Friday in Hollywood Reporter that is so important, where Steve Bannon, the chief strategist for President-elect Trump, lays it out that globalism was designed to make us poor and set up this elite system for rich families to control everything, and that America is going to absolutely now lead the world out of this with incredible prosperity, and they have the actuaries and the numbers, with cutting taxes on working class people that will bring back Americana under the Republican Party. But he says we've got to purge the Republicans of the establishment people, and we've got to deliver to the people, and we will get a majority vote from whites, Hispanics, blacks, you name it, because it'll be based on having a sovereign, prosperous nation, not one where the government takes the wealth from the middle class and then redistributes it to a growing, dumbed-down, giant underpopulation made up of every race of human. If you want human liberty, if you want freedom, if you want self-determination, if you want to be able to control at least a small part of your own destiny, we are brothers, we are sisters in arms together in the great quest for free association, free will, and the right for self-determination. I salute you. And again, thank you for taking the Infowar, which you are the heart of, to the next level, and to encourage you to continue right through this Thanksgiving, to share the information with your friends and family, to share the articles, the videos, the URLs, the podcast, and to support the broadcast by getting the amazing pro-Second Amendment apparel, the pro-Trump apparel, the pro-nationalism apparel, the non-GMO heirloom seeds, the high-quality water filtration systems, the amazing supplements and nutraceuticals, which are running 30 to 50% off right through this week, with every day having a loss leader special at InfoWarsStore.com. Check it out today, and please continue to support this operation.